On March 15, 2011, 4 New York Times journalists covering the Libyan conflict were captured near the front line by Qaddafi government forces. They were blindfolded, bound, and taken to a military base in Tripoli. For 2.5 days, their whereabouts were unknown. They were repeatedly beaten and threatened with death. Their Libyan driver is still missing, despite efforts to find him. After 6 days, the journalists were released. Back in New York, each sat down to reflect on what they had learned about Colonel Qaddafi's Libya.
In 6 days, we didn't see one Libya, we saw 3 Libyas. We started out with the rebel forces, and for most of the time I was there, they were a rabble in retreat. But they were adept at propaganda. They wanted the Western media there, and they knew what they wanted from them. They wanted to send out the message that the West should impose a no-fly zone. They had a menu. We want a no-fly zone, but we don't want boots on the ground. They were very nervous about having us there because the Gaddafi forces were close. And then suddenly we found out just how close those forces were, because we were captured by them. We were being dragged out of a car at gunpoint at a checkpoint, and these people were punching and kicking and groping our woman colleague. And at the same time, we had the propaganda from them, equally expert. Gaddafi's speeches were ringtones on their cell phones. They were assuring us that the rebels were all al-Qaeda. And this just went on. And then suddenly they put us in a car and they drove us for 8 hours across the southern coast of the Mediterranean. I mean, any other circumstances, it would be a beautiful drive, but we were blindfolded and our hands were bound. And suddenly we found ourselves in the third Libya, in the heart of Colonel Gaddafi's regime, in marble-floored, wood-panelled ministry buildings with urbane diplomats in perfect, impeccable English, assuring us that we wouldn't be beaten, assuring us that they were a regime, that they should be taken seriously as such by the international community. They wanted legitimacy, and all the time we're thinking, yeah, but on the far rim, on the outer spiral of your regime, your edge of control, your men are beating and kicking and punching and a rabble. And it was a very rare insight for Western journalists into a country that few have seen for decades now.
I've been covering conflict since 2000 in the Middle East, South Asia, Africa, and I've been detained before. In 2004, I was detained in Garma outside of Fallujah and held for most of the day at gunpoint with a colleague from the New York Times. And in that time, I was never, ever mistreated. I was not punched, I was not roughed around, I was not groped. They were Sunni insurgents and they treated me with respect, even though they were trying to ascertain our identity in that time. In Libya, it was incredibly surprising to me how I was treated. I have never been punched in the face before. This was the first time in my life I've had a man look me in the eye and punch me in the face. And especially when I was bound, hands and feet. And at some point, the second time I was punched, I was also blindfolded. So for me, that was astonishing. It speaks volumes to me as to what kind of society can have people who treat women like this or who treat international journalists like this. What does that say about the leadership of Libya if journalists and women are treated so abusively?
Within seconds of leaving a group of opposition fighters, we were captured by government soldiers. And in a flash, you saw you're transferred from one to the next. And you could see that the guys on the other side of that hill were just as poorly trained and unable to make decisions and without any order whatsoever. And this was quite upsetting actually when we were caught, because at that time you want to be with some authority, you want a hierarchy, you want a commander to come along and say, these people are journalists, these people are under, they're not to be treated this way. But that wasn't the case at all. There were people running all over the place, threatening to kill us, and this went on for a long time.
I thought there was a telling moment when we arrived at the airfield in Tripoli. We were put into an Interior Ministry vehicle. We were handcuffed and blindfolded. And on the tarmac there was a fight between the Foreign Ministry, or what appeared to be the Foreign Ministry, the Defense Ministry, the Interior Ministry, and perhaps even brigades loyal to Muammar Gaddafi's sons over who would get us, who would take control of us. And I thought it was right there I got the sense of what we were dealing with, this divide between the semblance of a state or the pretensions of a state and what was really the wreckage of a state. And I think we saw that wreckage of the state from Ashdabia all the way to that tarmac in Tripoli, where government branches there in front of us were fighting over who would take custody of us. I got the sense then that this was not going to be Egypt. This is not going to be Tunisia. It's not going to be one of these Arab revolutions that reached fruition rather quickly, that entered a transition, and that most of the people who took part in it thought was going to go rather well. This was much a darker incarnation of that. There is going to be a reckoning in Libya that's going to last a long time over how to confront 4 decades of Muammar Gaddafi's rule and the legacy of that rule. That rule has disfigured the society, it's disfigured the state, and the task of coming to terms with that may very well haunt a generation.